So it's 2 after 11 here today, and we'll get started with Steve Young on protecting rare species from invasives in the Finger Lakes region. Steve is the chief botanist for the New York Natural Heritage Program. This is a program of the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, but it's based in Albany, New York. He has a bachelor's degree in environmental and resource management from SUNY ESF and a master's degree in taxonomic botany from the University of Florida. He's visited many sites in every county across the state, inventorying and studying its rare plants. He's the author of the online New York Rare Plant Conservation Guides and the New York Rare Plant Status Lists. He's the founder of the Adirondack Botanical Society, coordinator of the Long Island Invasive Species Management Area from 2010 to 2016, as well as the secretary of the New York Flora Association. This is Hillary Mosier facilitating this program today. I am the Finger Lakes PRISM coordinator, and so I've had the pleasure of working with Steve until he moved to this new position in 2016, and I thank him very much for participating today and for all of you who are on the line. So I'll let Steve take over at this point. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thanks very much, Hillary. And thank you for inviting me today to talk about rare species and invasives in the Finger Lakes. I think the last time I gave a talk at the Finger Lakes Prism, I had to drive through a raging snowstorm to get there, but this is much easier. Right? This is much easier today to just walk down the stairs into my office, but I would much rather be in Geneva, let me tell you. So I'd like to start out today by talking about how the Heritage Program works and what we do with rare species, and then go into the invasive species that affect those rare species. So if you're not familiar with the New York Natural Heritage Program, we are, as Hillary said, based in Albany, but we're a program of SUNY ESF and under the Forest Biology Department. And we provide information and data to facilitate conservation of New York's biodiversity. There's our website, nynhp.org, if you'd like to learn more about us. And we do have a new website that will be online probably in a couple of weeks, so you can check that out. We sit in the DEC building when there's no COVID and we're not sitting at home, and work out of Albany at the DEC building. And even though we inventory all biodiversity across the state, we focus on rare plants and animals, ecological communities, and we also have the IMAP Invasives program in Heritage. We have about 28 staff consisting of zoologists and botanists, community ecologists, information people, database people, GIS people, and our administration. So I'd like to talk about how we rank species first, because I'll be referring to these in the talk. And we're one of a whole series of heritage programs throughout the United States and in some countries in the Western Hemisphere. And we all use the same methodology. And one of the great things about the heritage programs across the country is that they rank their species the same. And so we can talk to each other and know how rare species are globally and how rare they are within each state. So up at the top there, you see on the left are the global ranks G1 to G5 and the state ranks in New York S1 to S5. So if it's a 1, it's critically imperiled. 2, it's imperiled. 3, vulnerable. 4, apparently secure, and 5, secure. So we usually focus on the S1, the G1 to G3s always, and S1 to S3s. And those ranks take into account a lot of different factors, including population, viability, and landscape, and other things that I'll talk about. So you see down in the lower left, the global rank is given by an organization called NatureServe in Washington or Virginia in Roslyn. And they figure out the global ranks for all the species. And then we give each state species a state rank. And then down at the bottom, you can see we also give the rank of historical, which is if the species is older than 1980. And then we often look for historical species too. And then the rank of X is presumed extirpated. We don't think it's surviving anymore in New York. We gather a lot of information during the field season. All our scientists are out in the field gathering information about the rare species and about the environment in general. So up in the upper left, you see Madison Bowe. She's one of our botany assistants that we hire every year from SUNY ESF, a student from SUNY ESF. And she's using a tablet to take information about a rare species. So we take information directly into digital tablets. Here I am on the upper right photographing an orchid for our Adirondack Orchid Project. And we also get a lot of information from other sources. So in the lower left, you see some botanists that are on Valcour Island helping us inventory the rare plants of Valcour Island up in Lake Champlain. Steve Daniel, Ann Johnson, who did the flora of St. Lawrence County, Dan Spada from the Adirondacks. And just shows that we do have a big network of botanists and other people throughout the state sending us information. Also, through their invasive work, the prisms also are gathering information about rare species. You can see Kate and Joshua from the Finger Lakes Prism have given us information about this spiny water nymph through their aquatic work in Cayuga Lake. And in 2019, it was sighted on the west side of Cayuga Lake for the first time since 1981. So that was really nice to get that information from Kate and Joshua. He updated it in 2020. This is an S1, so it's very rare in New York State. And it's nice to see that there's a pretty good population still in Cayuga Lake. Just to show you that we're surveying all over the state during the field season. These are our survey locations in a 15-year period from 2002 to 2017. So you can see where we've done surveys across New York. We do have a state parks program also. We have a botanist, Rich Ring, who focuses on state parks, and a community ecologist that also, Julie Lundgren, that focuses on the ecological communities of the state parks. So you see there are a lot of dots in state parks. And here's a map of the existing rare plant locations across New York. And when we're out in the field looking at these locations and updating them and trying to find new plants, we focus on gathering information about the size of the occurrence, the condition of the plants, the surrounding landscape, whether it's intact, a pristine landscape, or whether it's in the middle of a city, and the threats to those occurrences. And that's where we get a lot of information from the prisms and IMAP on invasive species threats. We look at the viability of the occurrence and then the trends over time. How's it doing over time? Is it increasing or decreasing in abundance? And our priority for doing surveys is that next list there, the globally rare and federally listed species we try and survey every year. We'll talk about some of those later on. We like to keep our S1 and S2 and our historicals up to date. We look for historical records to see if they're still there. We're concerned about declining species, so we want to check up on those and see what we can do to manage those better. We also participate in program-wide projects. So, for example, we had a project in 2019 to survey Junius ponds near Geneva, and we did it along with the community ecologists. So they surveyed the communities and we looked at the rare species and also the invasive species there. We like to go to new places. You can see there's a lot of blank space on that map there, and we always try and get out to those places and see if there's anything new and look for interesting habitats. And we also do distribution models, trying to figure out where these plants would occur using GIS distribution modeling and trying to check those out to see if they still exist there or if they do exist. You can see Long Island is the place where we have the most concentrated rare species in the state. But there are a fair amount in the Finger Lakes too. So we've been inventorying the state since the mid 80s, actually since probably 83. And in the early days, in the 80s, we took up into the early 90s, we took all our information on paper. And here you can see Bob Zaremba, one of our first botanists to inventoried Long Island and found a lot of rare species there. And this is one of our forms just to show you how we kept information from different surveys on our summer and summarize that information. Here he is at Hempstead Plains grassland, which is a grassland in Nassau County. That's the Nassau County Coliseum in the background. If you ever get a chance to visit the Hempstead Plains, I recommend it. It's a really interesting place. And now we, as I said, we use tablets to put that information into a digital form, and then we downloaded the information into what's called the field form database. So we have this database of our sites, and you can see this survey site is Mitchell Field, which is the Hempstead Plains. It used to be an old air base called Mitchell Field. And we take plant lists and GPS coordinates and habitat comments and photographs of the surveys that we're doing. You can see here's a list from the Hempstead Plains of species that we found at this area A. And you can see there's a couple of invasives there highlighted in yellow: Elaeagnus umbellata, autumn olive, and Euphorbia cyparissius, the cypress spurge. And the data from these field forms is also downloaded later into IMAP. We also gather information from historical records and floras and any publications that come out, and try and look through those plant lists or the publications and see if there's any rare plant records in them. This is our library of rare plant lists that we have in our office. And now we're using iNaturalist, if you're familiar with that program, to also gather information. We have a Rare Plants of New York State iNaturalist project that people are using to enter information about rare plants. If you're interested, you can contact me, and I can put you on this project if you think you will be entering information on rare plants. We also have the Adirondack Orchid Survey, which we started a few years ago, and we're inventorying all of the orchids we can find in the Adirondacks and putting them into this project. And then all that information that we gather is put into what is called Biotics database. And this is a database that's maintained by NatureServe in Washington. And we put our information into what are called element occurrences. An element refers to rare species and natural communities or ecological communities. So we have many, many records of occurrences around the state of communities, rare species, rare animals, and rare plants. And one of the fields in that database is the threats field. And in there we put what threats we think are important for that occurrence. And here you can see on the right, the list, some of the exotic species and invasives that we have put into our threats field for these occurrences here. And down at the bottom, these are the main invasives that are listed in that threats field by abundance. So Phragmites is the most common species as a threat to are rare species, rare plants. And then it goes down the line. Purple loosestrife, probably not as much anymore because of the work that's put into purple loosestrife. And then you can see all of these common invasive species that we have that have been affecting rare species. Sometimes we just put invasive species, which isn't very helpful. We really should put the specific rare species that's in there. And now we have New York IMAP invasives, which has provided a lot more data than we could provide just by doing our rare plant and rare animal surveys. By having all the PRISM people out there putting in IMAP invasives information, and this has really helped us a lot to figure out what the threats are from invasive species to rare plants across the state. So if we go back to the Hempstead Plains grassland and look, that's Nassau County Community College in the background. But if we look at the how important this place is, it's a very important community. It's a globally endangered natural community. There's 14 rare, threatened, and endangered plant species. 2 of them are globally rare, and 3 species have the state's best occurrence in the whole state. So it's a very important place. And you can see by looking at plant lists through the years from 1972 to 2017, you can see how many more invasives were recorded in those plant lists. So from 1972, there were only 8. In 2017, 34 invasive species. 23 of those are ranked high or very high. So this is a trend that is common in a lot of places around the state. In the background there, you can see Lespedeza cuneata, the Asian bush clover, which is a really terrible rhizomatous bush clover that's causing problems in grasslands on Long Island. So this trend is a disturbing trend. And why is that happening? We've been noticing that trend for many years now. And in the upper right, just wondering if this is really a perfect storm that's happening. You've got a lot of things happening at the same time. You've got a lot of habitat fragmentation, which often results in high deer abundance, and they're clearing out the understory and allowing invasive species to proliferate. You have a lot of soil disturbance, which is very important for providing great habitat for invasives when you disturb the soil. Excessive nitrogen, of course, the exotic introductions that people have brought in, new ones all the time. Climate change is happening. There's been ignorance and neglect on what to really do with invasive plants. And some of these invasives that have been here for a long time are coming out of their lag phases. And they've been here for a long time, but now, because of all these things that have been happening, they're really becoming more common. So we have been really aware of this trend since the mid-1990s, and we were really concerned about what was happening. And on the lower left there, you can see in 1994, Bob Zaremba and I and Tom Lyons from Parks, we got as many people together as we could to have a meeting on invasive plant management and what was happening. And we started what was called the Ad Hoc Committee on invasive plants. And that organization continued until 1999 when we formed the Invasive Plant Council of New York State. And Bob Zaremba and I started that with a few other people. And that continued to really make invasive plants, put out more information on invasive plants across the state. And we did meetings and conferences around the state. And then that resulted in 2005 with the organization of the prisms. And you can see the map of the prisms on the right, the Finger Lakes prism in the middle there, the largest prism in the state. And it's just been really great to see that progress from our little committee in 1994 up to now, when we have a lot of money and also a lot of people out there working on invasive species. So let's look at the Finger Lakes prism. And here it is in central New York, encompassing those counties. And if we look at the ecoregions that comprise this prism, you can see it's very diverse. There are 7 ecoregions that span the prism, from the Erie, Ontario Lake Plain in the north, the Ontario lowlands, a large part of the prism, the Finger Lakes uplands and gorges, and then in the south you have the glaciated Low Allegheny Plateau, which is a series of hills and ravines and valleys that are a real mosaic of woodlands and agriculture, urban areas. So it's very diverse. And we also have some other little ecoregions sort of just get into the prism, the Delaware Neversink Highlands in the lower right, the Mohawk Valley just a little bit in the east, and then in the west you have the glaciated Allegheny Hills also. So there is, again, when you look at this map, you can see a lot of mosaic of different land use across the prism, but also the Finger Lakes, which are really the only place in the world where you have this number of large lakes like this. If you want to learn more about ecoregions, you can just Google this level 3 and 4 ecoregions by state, and you get to this website and you can download this really cool map, and it explains all about the ecoregions and what they are comprised of. All right, from ecoregions, let's go down to the ecological communities that span the prism. We have 50 rare and exemplary ecological communities. So rare ones, of course, ones that are not common, and exemplary means that they are the best examples in the state of those ecological communities. You can see across the prism, we have a lot of them, and there's a lack of them down in Broome County, Tioga County. Not too many in Steuben County either, but I don't know if that's just because of a lack of work there, or that it's just not as diverse there. But you can find out more about these communities if you go to our Ecological Communities of New York State publication at our website, and it describes all of the ecological communities and what they consist of. And you can see at the top sort of a definition of what an ecological community is. It's a variable assemblage of interacting plant and animal populations that share a common environment. And each one of them has a name. And one of our, what we do, the ecologists in our program spend a lot of time naming these communities and figuring out where the communities are in the state. We also have what are called the conservation guides online, and you can see the website there at the lower right, guides.nynhp.org, or you can just Google conservation guides, natural heritage conservation guides, and there's a description of each of the communities in the state. This one is the Appalachian Oak Hickory Forest, which we'll talk a little bit about. And you can see it summarizes, talks about conservation and management, the range of them, how to identify them, and has pictures of them. So these are great. This is a great resource to use. Now, looking at rare species, rare plants specifically, we have 103 different existing rare plant species in the Finger Lakes prism. That's a lot of rare species. And these are where they occur across the prism. And these are existing ones. So this isn't this doesn't include the historical occurrences that are before 1980. So we still have a lot of occurrences. And you can find out more about rare species by looking at the rare plant list that I do. It lists all of the species and where they are, the counties that they're in, and their ranks. We also have guides to the rare species, which you can find out a lot more information about each species on our guides. Not all rare species have a guide yet, but we're working on that. So you can also go to the Environmental Resource Mapper, which is a website that DEC provides, and it has, you can go here and look at maps of where these communities are and blob maps of where these rare species are. So this is really important if you're thinking of doing invasive species control in an area. It'd be good to look at these maps first to see, well, there's some rare species blobs here. This is an important natural community. We should probably ask to see if there are rare species that our invasive species control work might affect. You might not be aware of some of the rare species that are there, and you might inadvertently do something to them, or you'd want to know what to protect by doing the invasive species work. And we have a lot of invasive species in the Finger Lakes, 214 different species. And these are the locations. Of course, with IMAP invasives and all the work that the PRISM has done, we have a lot more dots than we used to have. But you can see that there's a real threat from invasive species now in the Finger Lakes. Now let's take a look at some specific examples. These are what we call the Bristol Hills between Canandaigua Lake and the bottom of Honeoye Lake. It's an Appalachian oak hickory forest. It's a common globally, and it's fairly common statewide. But this is one of the best examples of Appalachian oak hickory forest in the state. It's large, it's very intact, and just a really nice example between these two Finger Lakes. There is one place, this polygon here is actually a silver maple ash swamp. Doesn't include the Appalachian oak hickory forest. We'll talk about those later too. Now, if we look at a photograph of an Appalachian oak hickory forest, it's just a really nice, beautiful forest dominated by the different oaks and hickories. And it does have some ash in it. And here's a nice understory of one in the Finger Lakes with wild sarsaparilla, one of the common understory species. And here's a map of the Bristol Hills with the invasive species green dots mapped. And you can see there's not a lot of, hardly any green dots that are within that forest, which is good. And it shows that large intact forests, this is generally large intact forests, don't have a lot of invasive species. And in the upper right, you can see there's one little green dot up there. And I wonder what that is. Well, actually within these forests, you have ravines, and they often include little hemlock woodlands that have hemlock woolly adelgid in them. So that's what that little dot up there is one occurrence of hemlock woolly adelgid. You can see how the hemlocks are around that ravine there. Now let's look at a little more rare community, silver maple ash swamp. And this is a common globally. It's getting more rare in the state. It's an S3, we're getting more rare there. But this is one at the south end of Canadice Lake at the inlet there. And you can see not as large as the Appalachian oak hickory forest, and there's a road and some settlement nearby. So we might expect that there might be more invasive species here just because it's not large and intact. But silver maple ash swamps, there's more silver maple ash swamps in the Finger Lakes PRISM than in anywhere else in the state. some in Western New York, some up into Slilo, St. Lawrence, but most of them are here. Most of the large ones and best examples are here in the Finger Lakes. So let's look at the picture of what an understory or what a view of a silver maple ash swamp looks like. Beautiful swamp with beautiful trees and an understory that's comprised of sedges and different herbs, shrubs, wetland shrubs like nattyberry and viburnums, some dogwoods. And you have a rare species here. Oftentimes there are vernal ponds or vernal pools in these swamps, and you have things like false hop sedge around those vernal pools. Carex lupuliformis. This is a state threatened sedge that often occurs in these places. So let's look at the invasives that have been mapped for silver maple ash swamp there. You see there's a fair amount, but the ones with an asterisk are the most highly ranked ones. We have multiflora rose, reed canary grass, Morrow's honeysuckle, garlic mustard, Asian bittersweet. So if we wanted to keep this in this community intact, we would probably want to work on getting those out of there, and depending on the abundance of each one. Now let's go to a community that's very rare. This is an inland salt marsh with an inland salt pond. And these are globally ranked G2, critical, and S1, critically imperiled. These inland salt marshes occur around the Montezuma area and around Syracuse. There used to be some really extensive salt marshes around Onondaga Lake, if you know the history of the salt industry in central New York. And they are springs that come up through those salt formations and establish these salt marshes inland, not like the salt marshes on the coast, but they have many of the plants that are also in the salt marshes along the coast down on Long Island. Really interesting areas. Here's a photograph of Cairncross Salt Marsh, and you can see one of the big threats to this is Phragmites, but it does contain American salt marsh bulrush, G5S2 threatened, Bulbochinus myrtimus subspecies paludosus. It's a really beautiful bulrush, and it occurs here with some other salt marsh plants too, that you only find on the coast and in these inland salt marshes. Really interesting areas. So if we look at the invasives that have come into Cairncross, we've got Phragmites that you saw in that picture, a little bull thistle, reed canary grass again, purple loosestrife usually is on the fringe of these salt marshes, usually too salty for loosestrife in the middle, but there are some mapping there in the interior, and then autumn olive too. So again, this would be a really good place to work on to try and keep those invasives out. All right, from communities, I'd like to go to talk about some rare species that we work on in the Finger Lakes and some of the threats to them. And the first one is the one in the picture that I showed, the first slide that I had up. And this is Leedy's roseroot, Rhodiola rosea. And this is a subspecies integrifolia, which occurs in the Midwest, in the upper Midwest in Minnesota, and also here on the cliffs of Seneca Lake. And it's a G1, critically imperiled, S1, of course, and federally threatened. So it's listed federally. And we have the largest population in the world of this plant here on the cliffs in Seneca Lake. Very important to protect. We inventory this every 5 years. Here you can see the group that did the last inventory. We have in the back there, Hillary helped us out in the white hat, and we had a good group of people that spent all day wandering in the water of the lake looking for this plant on the cliffs. And this is pretty much how we survey for this plant, because the water goes right up to the cliffs. And there are a lot of boat docks and that we have to get around, but it's just a lot of fun. And this summer, we plan to do our next survey. So if anyone wants to help out with that, you can contact me. This is Joe McMullen, a botanist who was helping with the survey. And then a lot of studies have been done on Ledes roseroot, a lot of taxonomic studies, genetic studies. And here, Noel Raymond from ESF is doing more of those genetic studies with Danny Fernando and Don Leopold at ESF. She's a grad student there. One of our biggest threats to Ledes roseroot is Japanese knotweed. And this occurs all along the base of the cliffs. It doesn't cover every foot of the cliffs, but there are some areas where it's very common and other areas where it doesn't exist. But it does obscure the base of the cliffs and the sun. It keeps the sun out from the base of the cliffs and probably has excluded some of the Ledes roseroot from the base of these cliffs. Here's Noel and another person from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife trying to get through these stems to the base of the cliff to try and see if there are any Ledes roseroot there. So that's one of the hardest parts of the survey, is climbing through these stems of the Japanese knotweed. We're also concerned about black swallowwort, or maybe pale swallowwort, that's starting to come into the cliffs, where in other parts of the Finger Lakes, it's very common on shale cliffs like this. And here in Watkins Glen, which is very close to that population, there was a planting of porcelainberry that I was walking down the street going to my motel, and I just happened to see porcelainberry planted here, Ampelopsis glandulosa, which is a very serious invader in Lower Hudson and Long Island. It's like the kudzu of the north, and it just really takes over. So concerned about that coming into these cliffs. So we always have to keep a lookout on new things that we might discover. Another federally threatened plant that we have in the Finger Lakes is American hartstongue fern, Asplenium scolopendrium, variety americanum. It's a G3, globally rare, and an S1. These are at Clark Reservation near Syracuse. And people like Mike Service, who works with the Parks Department, was a graduate student at ESF, has worked a lot on the genetics and cultivating these plants to try and preserve them. And just one example of a lot of people that have been working on hartstongue fern at ESF and elsewhere. And Tom Hughes, who works for the Parks Department out there, has worked a lot on trying to keep out swallowwort and some other invasives from affecting these, because this is limestone. Swallowwort loves limestone, so it has come into the hartstongue fern areas. And here you can see a picture of pale swallowwort leaves. The arrow goes to the leaves there, just growing right beside those long hartstongue fern leaves. And it's really difficult because these are talus slopes, and so it's really difficult to try and eliminate the swallowwort, to pull those out without disturbing the talus slope. And the Parks Department has done a really good job of controlling this. Another very rare plant in the Finger Lakes is Clausen's reedgrass, Calamagrostis perplexa. The taxonomy was kind of perplexing for this grass. This occurs at Danby State Forest, south of Ithaca. It's a G1, again, S1. This is actually the only population in the whole world for this grass. So we like to make sure that it's the threats are low for this plant, but we do have concerns about slender false brome, Brachypodium sylvaticum, getting in. It is in Danby State Forest, so we're concerned about this grass overtaking areas where that Calamagrostis is growing. So we're always on the lookout, making sure it just sort of mapping where that grass is and seeing how close it is coming to Clausen's reedgrass. This is one that everybody should be on the lookout for. It's one that is low in abundance so far in the state, and we think that maybe we can eradicate it or maybe contain it, but we're not sure yet. And has these arching inflorescences in a clumping grass that has big arching inflorescences. So keep a lookout for that. There's a lot of information on the website, Finger Lakes website, about it, so become familiar with that. In Cayuga Lake and other water bodies, we do have a lot of rare aquatic species. So here's 4 of them. In the upper left is the spiny water nymph in Cayuga Lake. On the upper right, straight-leaved pondweed, a couple of pondweeds on the right, thread-leaved pondweed and straight-leaved pondweed. They're both S1s, critically imperiled, occurring in Cayuga Lake. I think mainly on the east side of Cayuga Lake. And then we have in the lower left, Potamogeton hillii, which is in Bear Swamp in Sempronius. And Hills pondweed, that's globally rare and state rare also. So all these things are being threatened by that plant in the middle there, Hydrilla, which you're probably all familiar with, and a big effort by the PRISM to control this in Cayuga Lake and elsewhere. So, we want to control Hydrilla, but then we don't want to, there's a sort of fine line between controlling an invasive and also affecting the rare plants with your control efforts. So we always have to watch out for that. There's also a number of plants that are just coming into the state or very rare in the PRISM that we're concerned about with these aquatic species. And if you go to the website of the Finger Lakes PRISM and Priority Invasives tab, you'll see a list of Finger Lakes tiered ranking species. And these are the species that are in Tier 1 and Tier 2. Tier 1 are ones that aren't in the PRISM yet. Tier 2 are ones of low abundance in the PRISM. And these are aquatic species that I have starred here that are ones that we're on the lookout for that might affect these rare aquatic species. So I would encourage you to become familiar with these Tier 1 and Tier 2 species and just to be on the lookout for them. We have this water wheel, Brazilian waterweed, floating water primrose, parrot feather, yellow floating heart water soldier, which is up in Canada, and European frogbit. So where do these occur? They are mainly in eastern New York and down on Long Island. The nymphoides and the Brazilian waterweed is mainly on Long Island. There's some that were just discovered in western New York. You can see that out near Buffalo along Lake Erie. And this Myriophyllum aquaticum is just also recently discovered in the Finger Lakes PRISM. So I think it's probably now gone from a Tier 1 to a Tier 2. And so those are the ones that you really need to work on to eradicate now before they become more common. And hopefully the PRISMs in the eastern part of New York will keep those from coming west. Now, down in the lower part of the Catskills there, you see one called Aldrovanda vesiculosa. And that one, that's the only occurrence for the state of that in a pond down in Delaware County, or I guess it's Sullivan County. I just wanted to sort of highlight that one. here with a photograph, Aldrovanda vesiculosa water wheel, and it's called that because the leaves are arranged in whorls along the stem, kind of like some of our bladderworts are arranged. But unlike bladderworts that have a little bladder at the end of the leaves, this one has, at the end of the leaves, it has almost like a Venus flytrap that will trap small insects and other things in the water. So we're concerned about what it might be doing to the underwater fauna and insect fauna in that lake where it's in. And where the lake that it's in, it's actually taken over a lot of the lake. So we're very concerned that this is going to start spreading out from that lake to other places, on maybe on waterfowl. So just keep a lookout for this water wheel, these whorls of leaves with those sort of Venus flytraps on the ends of the leaves with little hairs like that. So I think I'll end it there with water wheel, and also with this photograph of the website of the Finger Lakes Prism, just to say thank you for the Prism and all its staff and all the volunteers who work with the Prism to control invasive species and work to preserve the biodiversity across New York State. Thanks very much. I guess I'll take questions.
Thank you so much, Steve. This has been a great presentation, a lot of information. I've got a ton of notes that I've got to do some more research. So thanks for the extra work.
Okay.
We do have some question. One, will you be able to provide the PDF of this presentation so I can send it out to people?
Yes.
Great. This has also been recorded, so anyone who wants to review this can do so. It'll be on the fingerlakesinvasives.org website. Another question that we have here is that one person was wondering if there are efforts being made to remove invasives, for example, in the Hempstead fields.
Yes, actually, the Hempstead Plains has a new project to remove invasives, and they're doing a lot of work. Now they got a big grant that we worked with them to inventory the communities and the plants there, and now they've gone in and started to really manage the invasives that they have. So it's been a great project.
Great. Whitney has indicated that there will be a talk about Hart's tongue fern for the Finger Lakes Native Plant Society in February, given by Mike. So that'll be exciting. Are there preferred methods for invasive species management in sensitive areas or in and around rare plants?
Yeah, of course, it depends on the rare plant and the invasive. So, and how much disturbance you're going to do, and if you're using herbicides or mechanical methods. So you just should always contact me or people in the area that are familiar with those rare plants to see what the best action to take would be to control the invasives around them.
Yeah, that's great. So contact Steve or do some due diligence for research on invasive species management around rare sensitive plants.
Right.
Do you happen to know the name of the lake that has water wheel in the Crisp region?
It's called Big Pond, and
Pond.
It's privately owned.
And they're managing it there?
I'm not sure what the latest management is for it there. It's difficult because it's around the whole lake, and so I'm not sure what they've done yet.
And they think, what was the pathway for spread in that specific
area?
Well,
actually, it got there because it's kind of a weird story, because it's a globally rare plant. So there's a lot of people trying to preserve it. It's native to Europe and Asia and even down into Australia. But where it does occur, it's very rare. So there is interest from the carnivorous plant community, people who collect carnivorous plants, to preserve it. And so one person took it upon himself to introduce it in different water bodies in the United States, in Virginia, New Jersey, and in New York, thinking that it would preserve this plant. And of course, that was not a good decision. And now it's a problem.
Yes. Best not to Johnny Appleseed across the country.
Right.
One participant is asking about volunteer opportunities, and is there a website, or will you be posting contact information for these volunteer opportunities?
Actually, we don't have a volunteer page or anything. That's one thing we're thinking about with the Heritage Program, but so far we don't have anything. But if you want, you can email me and I can put you on. I have a list of people that I contact when I go out to places, just to see if they want to go along.
Another question is, in the forest areas of Bristol, are there lack of invasives due to lack of trails or lack of accessibility for community observances via IMAP? So what accounts for the invasive absences?
That's a good question, and I don't know. I mean, we have done community work there, and it shows that there aren't a lot of invasives there, and I think because it is an intact community. So probably if you had more trails, you might have more invasives coming in. A lot of it's private land. There is some DEC land there, so the private landowners probably don't have a lot of trails, and that's one reason why there may not be invasives there. But it also may be that those private landowners aren't doing invasive inventories too.
Sure. So there might be a few reasons there.
Right. Exactly. But overall, larger, more intact natural communities have fewer invasives.
So Linda Zimba from the Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge has indicated that they have a lot of volunteer opportunities. So if Linda, if you could put your email address in the chat box for people to reach out to you to get on that list of volunteer opportunities, that would be great. Another question is, are the mapped polygons of natural communities available to the public?
They are in that, I don't know about putting them on your own GIS, but they are available in that environmental resource mapper. You can look at them there. I'm not sure if you can download them there from that website. I've never tried that. But if you have a certain project that you want to do and you're interested in the boundaries, you can contact us. Nick Conrad is the information manager for the Heritage Program, and so you can contact him and ask him for those boundaries if you want to put them into your own GIS or a map.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm going to play around with that a little my own self.
Yeah.
Eric Randall has said that years ago he collected Salicornia and ulva from Wolf Creek tributary in western New York near Morton Salt Waste Pond. Does this make for an ecological site of interest, especially because it's a man-made rare plant occurrence?
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because actually in 2020 I had planned a field trip there to look at that, because nobody had really done any inventory of that occurrence, and it's sort of almost like an artificial occurrence because it was from a factory, a salt factory there. But we were interested to see if there were any rare plants that were growing around the factory and also downstream from it where the salt water was being drained. So maybe this year we can get out there and take a look.
Maybe this year.
But yeah, it's a really interesting area.
Hope springs eternal, Steve.
Yeah.
Christina Morrow has indicated that if you're in the Ithaca area, they have volunteer days at the Three Gorges Project. Ton of invasive species in that area. We welcome the opportunity to volunteer for their projects. Becky DeWitt has asked, is there a way to work with NICEAG and Asplunge when rare plants are identified in a particular area?
I'm not sure.
Like the gas, are like the electric and power line people, I think.
Is there an opportunity to work with rare plants and invasives?
Well, is there a way to work with them when rare plants are identified, maybe in the area that they manage?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because power lines and pipelines actually, especially when they go through wetlands, are often places where you find rare plants. So we do work with them to try and have them managed for rare plants.
Yeah, so she followed up with power line clearing. So it sounds like there is that opportunity to work with them, and I imagine that they are amenable to, working to preserve rare and native species. Yeah.
Yep.
That's great. So that we are no more questions in the chat box. In the Finger Lakes region, you had 214 invasive species in the Finger Lakes. And so I wonder if that could be broken out terrestrial versus aquatic, or did you get that just from IMAP invasives?
I just got that from IMAP. Yeah, I didn't break it out.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so I saw the map. It's hard to determine whether or not which lakes have the rare species and which, terrestrial locations have the rare species, especially at the Finger Lakes Institute, because we have so many more survey crews looking for aquatic plants versus our contracted work that does terrestrial plants. We're always have an eye to the aquatic side.
And a lot of surveys for invasives are done along roadsides too. So you often get more dots on a map along roads and trails than you do in the interior.
Yeah. So Steve, we didn't really get a chance to go into some of the, more emerging threats. I know that you put on there the aquatic ones of concern. I think European frogbit is far more prevalent than IMAP gives its credit for. We have it at a ton of locations. Linda had indicated that it's in Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge. It's throughout the Braddock Bay Wildlife Management Area complex. We're not controlling it. And Linda has indicated that they think they made it worse by trying to control it. So I wonder if you have any insight into management or have heard of any management techniques that are successful in controlling European frogbit?
No, I haven't. There's the similar, the primrose down on Long Island is kind of similar. They have, in the Peconic River, they have both of those species, and they've been trying to control it for years, and they've done large herbicide applications, which didn't work. And they've done a lot of work on just having people go out there and collect it. But again, that hasn't really worked in the long run. So, but in those cases, those are artificial dammed places in the river, not free flowing. Okay. So I don't know how many, I think it really depends on the nutrients coming into those where they are, those water bodies where they are, trying to find out what the causes of why they're there, and trying to work on those too. I mean, you can go out and do mechanical harvest, but you're going to have to do that forever if your lake is surrounded by houses putting lawn chemicals and fertilizers into the lake. So those things really there needs to be a watershed-wide look at everything that's contributing to what's happening in the lake and why those invasives might be prevalent there.
Yeah, just in the work that I've done tangentially with municipalities and other lake associations who are doing the 9 element plans, or looking at the tributaries and non-point source issues within a watershed, invasive species don't seem to come up when they're looking at watershed health. So I wonder if there is insight from you or your program. Even in-house, we've got watershed experts that don't know how to plug invasive species into their formula.
Right, and I think that's a really big gap because I've looked into if there are any actual manuals on surveying watersheds and seeing what's happening in regard to invasive species. And I haven't come up with anything. I mean, there's a lot of information out there about how to manage an invasive when it gets into your water body, but not about all of the factors that produce the conditions that are ripe for those things to come in and flourish. So I think there needs to be more work on that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There is that new Sea Grant publication on the role of local municipalities and entities in addressing aquatic invasive species. But they always seem to choose one or another. You know, is it aquatic or terrestrial? And forget about the wetlands because they're in a, you know, they're just, you know, overlap both. So they don't get, very often they don't get addressed at all.
Right.
They're neither aquatic nor terrestrial.
Yep.
So maybe in the future we can look to address that. Eric Randall has asked, is anyone keeping track of the rare bryophytes or endangered communities or fern allies?
Yes, the fern allies are on our rare list. So if you look at the list that is on our website, you can see the fern allies that are there, which are equisetums, the horsetails, and the ferns, not the ferns, the horsetails mainly. And we do have a rare bryophyte list also, so that's on our website. And we don't keep track, we don't do as much, we don't have a bryophyte or a moss expert in Heritage, so we don't have someone who's devoted to looking at the rare mosses, so we just take that information when the bryologists are out there finding them and give us that information. So there is a grad student at ESF right now, Ian Lay, who's working on rare bryophytes. And there's a lot of other work around the state on bryophytes. They're coming out with a new county list and of bryophytes, so that should be nice.
A county by county list?
Mm-hmm.
Amazing, wow.
Yeah.
So if you, there aren't any more questions in the chat box, but if you could indicate what are your top invasive threats, or do you think, maybe not your favorite, but what are the ones that we need to really, you know, if we could target one, maybe two, maybe three, which ones are they?
Well, again, anything that's tier 2 that is very low in abundance, those are the ones you really need to work on to keep out. For example, water hyacinth and water lettuce too. I mean, I think you've had some of those occurrences where they seem to flourish in the summer but go away in the winter, and whether they're actually surviving the winter or not is a question. But eventually with climate change, I think maybe they will. So those are things you really need to keep an eye on, those tier 2 species.
Perhaps we can stop them from being sold in the market.
Yeah.
In the marketplace.
It's hard to, it's sort of a catch-22 when things aren't abundant, and it's hard to look for them because you don't find them in most places. So it's hard to keep enthusiasm with these tier 1 and tier 2 species because you're not finding them, and they're only in a few places. But they're really some of the most important species to work on before they become common, because all the common species, the common invasive species we have now, were originally tier 1 and tier 2.
Right.
They were originally very low abundance before they became abundant. And you know, they may have been in low abundance for many years in their lag phase, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're common. So that's the kind of thing we need to avoid. We need to work on those things that are of low abundance.
Yeah, and keeping people engaged in the survey.
Right.
That I find my own self to be difficult with volunteers, because you're asking them to find something that's not there.
Yes.
Enthusiastically.
Yeah. I mean, to reward them for the surveys and not just finding something would be good. So.
Yeah. So Margot has asked if anyone is asking the nurseries or even DEC to stop growing and selling exotic species, which.
Yeah, we do have the prohibited list, of course, and the regulated list, and we're devising a new one. DEC is coming up with a new prohibited list and regulated lists maybe next year, hopefully this year, that will include a lot more invasives on it than has been there in the past. So look forward to that. And yeah, but probably looking at what your nursery is offering too is always good to see if maybe some things have slipped through, or I think nurseries are doing a pretty good job of keeping those invasives from being sold. But there's always the internet too.
Yeah, I find most of the rogue plants to be on, a garden exchange or, Craigslist posting,
Right.
From splices or, fragments that they've been able to grow additional plants. And if they're not on the prohibited or regulated species list, it's nearly impossible to address those.
Right. And sometimes invasive species are native to the US, so you have to watch out for that too. So like Silphium cup plant is native to the Midwest, but is often sold as a native plant in the Northeast. And it's causing problems in the Adirondacks and elsewhere. So you have to be aware of those too.
You just got to know everything, Steve.
There's a lot to know.
There's a lot to know, man. Well, thank you so much for speaking with all of us today. This is a wealth of information, and we so appreciate the work that you're doing, not only in the Finger Lakes, but New York State. And we're so happy to have you on board with all of the information sharing and work you're giving us all to do.
Okay, my pleasure. And I hope we can get out in the field this summer.
Yes, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2021. And we hope to see you for our next webinar, which will be in February. And we'll be talking about our AIS survey from the past 5 years. Maybe we'll be talking about our rare species finds as well as our invasive finds in our aquatic ecosystems. So thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Steve.
Okay. Bye-bye.